Okay, in this video we're going to cover how to rig the character. As you can see here from this finished model that I'll demo with, we have, let's say, the root control or the global control. I can grab this and I can move it, and so here we have the rig aside from the character. They're not combined yet. This part of the video we're going to cover how to build the rig, and then we're going to cover how to attach the character later. So right now we have the rig attached, and let's say I put it back here. What we have here is the root control for the hips, so I can grab the hips and you can see it moves the rig around. Let's say I grab the knee controls. You can see it pivots the knee around. I can grab the foot control and it will lift the foot up and the character can walk. There's also built-in a foot roll attribute, so I can click on this and you can see he lifts his heel up and then lifts his toe up. So we're going to add in the reverse lock foot for that. Over here we can grab the hand control and I can move the hand around. This is the IK hand. Then we have the character's torso, so I can go to rotate, and it rotates every part of him going upwards. The elbow control, so I can move the elbow around. And then we have over here the head, so I can take the head and rotate the head as well. The eyes are attached to it, so it kind of looks a little strange. I haven't attached the rest of the character yet. And then lastly we have the eye controls, which won't really make sense until the character is colored, so I'll color them. And you can see here that when I move, the character's eyes follow the eye controls. So let's turn that back into grayscale. It's easier to see. And so that's what we're going to be building here. There's also some finger controls in here, so I can grab these. And let's say I go over to select the mid, end, and upper. I can curl the fingers in as well. So we have some finger controls built in there. And so that's what we're going to cover in this video, is how to rig our character. And then we'll eventually cover how to attach the mesh to the rig later. Alright, so let's go back to where we last left off with. Should be this guy. Alright, so here we have where we last left off with. The character's already been modeled and completely finished. He's been UV unwrapped and he's been textured, so everything's ready for rigging. Let's say I also have I put them all on a mesh layer, so I can take this layer and turn it off and turn it back on. I can also go to template mode, which will help for rigging when we put the joints in there. I can also put them in reference mode, so I can't select them anymore. I also have the image plane still sitting in there, and I have the blend shapes. The blend shapes are a whole bunch of facial expressions, and we're going to use blend shapes to code them into the rig so that he can get different facial expressions. If you have the blend shapes already done and have them on your own layer, awesome. But if you don't have them done yet, I'll explain how to make the blend shapes and what they function or what they do when we get to skinning and attaching the mesh onto the character's rig. So if you don't have the blend shapes yet, don't worry about that. We'll cover that later. But at the moment, I already have the blend shapes pre-built out and hidden on their own layer. So that should be everything. There's nothing else left in the scene. So we're going to start rigging with what we have now. So to start rigging, let's go. I'm going to press 5 on the keyboard, and that'll put this in gray shaded mode. That's a little bit easier to see what I'm looking at. So now I'm going to go over to the first thing we want to make sure is that the character is sitting on top of the grid. You don't want to build the character kind of stuck in the middle of the grid, because when you send it to like a game engine and such, or when you're dropping him in the scene, it's better to drop him straight on the ground, flat and flush with the ground, rather than having him import in the middle of the ground and having to raise him up afterwards. So build your character standing on top of the very top of the grid. The next thing we want to make sure is that we go through and we want to freeze all the transformations. So if I click on the character mesh, you can see the translates and rotates are set to 0 and the scale is set to Y. The chest piece has a 0.15 on the translate Z. The shoulder pad has some translates and scales. The problem with this is if for the animator, when they're ready to move something, if they usually press 0 to 0 something out, it'll move the point around. We want to make sure when they press 0, it sends it back to the original starting position, which is this position. So the easiest way is just to grab all the pieces, go to Modify, and Freeze Transformations. I'll pull up the options just to make sure everything's set. So right now we have the Translate, Rotate, and Scale set. We might use Joint Orient later, but that's all we need for now, Translate, Rotate, Scale. So I pressed Freeze Transform, and it clears out everything. So whatever piece I'm selected on, they're all zeroed out. And the scales are 1 because that's 100%. All right, so that creates that cleans up our channel box. The next thing we want to do is we want to go through and delete all the history. If I click on a piece like this, you can see through modeling there was a lot of history in there. This will help clean up the hypergraph when we get to that later. So I'm going to select all the pieces again and go to Edit, Delete by Type, and delete out the history. By doing this, it should clear out a lot of extra data that we don't need in a file. If you wanted to go back and like change like whether it's smooth or unsmooth or different layers like that, by not having the history, we can't change that anymore. At the moment, I still have this at like pressing 3 on the keyboard. 1 is this mode, whereas the shirt already is nice and clean. If I press 1, it's already high poly. So we're going to cover how to what to do about the mesh and making sure they're all even and they're all smooth before we start skinning the character to the rig. So I'm not going to worry about that yet, but you can see they have different resolutions on there, so I'll cover the resolutions and the polygon level detail later. So that pretty much cleans out the history, that cleans out the attribute, or not the channel box. So now we're ready to start putting down our joints. I'm going to go over to, let's say, let's go to the side viewport. So in the side viewport, I'm going to press 5 on the keyboard, which will pull up the shaded mode. But I also want to put the X-ray joints on. Otherwise, if I start drawing the joints, it's going to appear inside the character, and I won't be able to see my joints. I can give you an example of that real quick. We're going to set the tab over here to animation, and I can have the I click on skeleton and joint tool and pull up the options just in case you can see what they are. And if I were to draw a joint, you can see, I click here and here, it draws it through the character, so I can't see where the joint's going. So by going over to inside the viewport window, going to shading X-ray joints, this way you can see through your character, and when you click off it, you know where the joint is sitting. Sometimes it also helps to put your character in template mode so you can see through them a little bit easier and see your joints, so that's up to you. Also, you notice the joint size is really small. So to make joints a little bigger if they're too small, or in some cases your joints might be too big, we can go over to Display, Animation, Joint Size. So going to the Animation Joint Size option, we click on that and it's set to 0.25 at the moment. If I set that to, let's say, 1 and press Enter, you can see the joint sizes are a lot larger. You're not affecting the rig per se, you're just changing the display on the screen of how big these joints are to make it easier to see. I'm going to set this back to 0.5 because that's a little bit large. 0.5 should work for this. When we get down to fingers, we're going to want to change that to like 0.25 to make it a little bit smaller. But for now, that should work. So I'll leave that there for now. And we can take this and delete that off. Alright, so let me start over now. So we're going to go to Skeleton, Joint Tool, and the settings by default should be fine. And I'm going to start drawing the joints. I'm going to do the leg joint first in the side view. So I'm going to click, and if you drag while still holding the left mouse button, you can kind of position where you want it to go. I'm going to put it right about here where I think the leg bone should occur. I'm going to click and drag with the left mouse button, and then I can pick where I want it to end at. So I'm going to end it right at the knee, and then I'm going to click and drag down to the ankle, and then down to the middle, the ball of the foot, and I can click and drag one more. If I hold the Shift key, you can see that it locks it, so I can't move it up and down, but if I let go of Shift, it'll move around. So if you wanted to lock it and get a little more accurate and hold it straight across, we're going to go to the end of the toe. Sometimes it's hard to see with template mode on, sometimes it's easier. So I can set this back to reference mode, and you can see it clearly right here. We have the leg bone coming straight down. I also want to make sure I have a little bit more of a preferred angle. This way, when the leg bends, the joint knows which way to bend. If you don't have enough of an angle right here where you can see where it's bent forward, if it's completely straight, then the leg doesn't know which way to bend. It could bend backwards, it could bend to the side. You have to have a little bit of an angle so it knows which way you intend for the joint to bend. Alright, so to change a joint, if I were to go to move and try and move this, it's going to move everything below it, and I don't want to move everything below it. So what you can do is press Insert on the keyboard, and by doing that you can start moving where this joint goes. So I'm going to grab the blue line and I can pull it forward. Ideally, you want to keep it as centered as possible, but you also want to make sure you have enough of a bend mark in there to signify that the character, that the joint is bending in that direction. And the issue occurs when you jump back to, let's say, the front view. So I'm going to go to front view, and there's our colored character. Press 5 on the keyboard to go to shaded mode. 6 will show you the colored, so 5 does that, and 4 does wireframe if you wanted to see wireframe. So 5 pulls this back up. So I'm going to go to turn insert back off, so it's back to the regular move tool, and go over to shading and x-ray the joints so I can see through it, and pull this over to the side where the hip bone or the leg bone should occur. And if I were to go and bend this, I could bend it, but you have to be careful that the primarily bent angle is the forward direction. If I were to bend this too much, let's say go to insert and bend this a lot here, it would suddenly think that the default angle is bending to the, I guess, his left or our right. And this way, every time you bend his legs, it's going to bend it out this direction. We want to make sure it bends forward. So the most extreme bend should be the one on the side view where it's coming forwards. But I can also just go to this one and go to the rotate. Rotates right here. And then rotate it out so it kind of stays as straight as possible, so you know that the most extreme bend is the preferred angle. So I'm going to slide that until it centers as well as possible right in the middle of his ankle, in the middle of his knee, and his leg. So all of that's set now. So if I were to jump out and go into perspective view, you can see that you can't, well, it's completely contained inside of his leg, which is great. But if I go to shading x-ray joints, then I can see that it's sitting inside of his leg straight on there, and then the bend is coming from the front direction. Alright, so that's all we need to do for the leg. So let's jump back to the side view, and I'm going to start going for the upper body. So let's try this again. We're going to go to skeleton, joint tool. And I don't want to click on the joint because that'll attach it, and I don't want to attach it just yet. I want to add another joint in there. So I'm going to click off the character, and still holding the left mouse button, I can drag it over to the character and set it on top there. So now they're sitting on top, but they're not actually joined because I started it by clicking and then dragging here. So I drag it over to here, and then I let go, and then I can left click and drag it straight upwards. So I'm going to put somewhere in the middle of his body, let's say about, I guess that should work. And then just left click again and drag. And then we're going to go from the middle of his, I guess his back down to up to his chest now. And then once I'm happy with that, click and drag up to his shoulders. So somewhere about right there. And then click and drag up to his neck. And then click and drag up to his head. Whether you want it to be like straight up and down or kind of bent, it shouldn't really matter for what we're doing. I can have it a little bit bent, I guess. So that'll work there. Press enter to confirm that. And now we have the backbone, the neck, and the head. Alright, and the last thing we want to do is the fingers, or the hand. And you can see it's going to get rather messy, or very overlapping. It's going to get rather hard to see. So I'm going to set this to really small. Let's say 0.25 on the joint size. You can see it gets really thin. This should make it easier for me to see which one is which between the leg, the arm, and the backbone. So let's go one more time. I'm going to go skeleton joint tool, and if you use tools a lot, you can go to the custom tab right here, and it's an empty tab, and I already have one here. Let me delete that out. So if it's an empty tab for you, you can add your own commonly used tools. So if I go to skeleton joint tool, if I hold the control and the shift key and then I click the joint tool, it'll add it to a menu. So by doing this, I can click this and I have my own commonly used attributes. I'm going to be using modify freeze transformations a lot. So if I use control, shift, and hold both of those and left click, it'll add the freeze transformations into this also. So now I can use this more commonly. So if you wanted to use custom menus, so you don't have to constantly keep jumping through here, that works also. I'm going to click back to the joint tool so I can start creating a new joint. Let's say I'm going to start right where I think the shoulder should occur. So somewhere, let's say right about here, and again, not clicking on the joint, but clicking near it and sliding over to it. Let's say the shoulder occurs there, and then click and drag over to where I think the elbow should occur. So again, we want that preferred angle, so it has to have somewhat of a bend this direction and forward, so notice that the elbow bends backwards. If you're doing a T-pose where it's more of a top-down, where his arms are straight out to the side, that's a little bit easier, okay, a lot easier on rigging. Whereas having a relaxed position where his arm's coming down, it's a little easier on the modeling aspect to get the clothes and the anatomy and the muscles all accurate. But it does make it more work on the rigging aspect. Anyway, so continue on, click and drag over to the wrist. I'm going to zoom in a bit more, and I'm going to do one of the fingers. So I'm going to come down to this knuckle, that knuckle, this one, and then the very tip of his finger. So we have all the joints oriented there. I'm going to press enter, and that puts down one joint. Let's jump over to the front view and try and align this. So I'm going to move over and slide this to about where I think his shoulder is going to occur. I'm going to rotate this over to here, and I can see that it looked right straight on here, but now that I've rotated it out, it really doesn't match at all anymore. So I'm going to go to move. I'm going to move that a little bit more to kind of match as well as possible where his shoulder should be occurring at, somewhere about there maybe. Okay, and I grab this one, and it'll pull everything forward, so I'm fine with that. Put that kind of center there, and again, try to leave as straightest line as possible. You want to make sure that the primary curve is the angle that his arm should be bending at. So that should mostly work. I'll take this one, move this down to his wrist. Alright, and again, it's mostly straight. And then we're going to go over here and move this to his finger. So I started with that finger. And then rotate that up. Okay, and let's check this in the side view, and that still, oops, doesn't match in the side view anymore. So let's, and this could take a lot of adjusting. Insert, and slide that over to here. And then grab, let's turn off insert and grab this one, and position that there, and then rotate that again. Alright, now let's check that again in side view. So now the side view matches, or the front view and the side view match. The wrist is pretty much in the right place in both locations. You can see as I adjusted here that hopefully it stays in the same position there. And that looks like it's more or less holding pretty well. Looks like I can probably adjust this just a little bit more. And again, depending on how long you want to spend doing this, you want it to be as accurate as possible. So when you do start bending and stretching with the character, it'll bend and stretch correctly. So I'm not going to spend too much longer on this to make sure it's super accurate, but as you can see, jumping back to perspective view, the joint runs down his arm, it bends where his elbow should bend, and that's the primary bending angle is right here. I could pull this out a little bit more if I wanted to, and exaggerate just a little bit more just to make sure it definitely does bend in that direction. And then we have this down here with the wrist, and over down to his fingers. Alright, so that's good there. So now we need to make some more joints. I'm going to do this in the side view. Actually, the easiest way of doing it is just to select these joints, and I'm going to press Control D on the keyboard to duplicate it, and then I can move the duplicated joints over here. That does pre-parent it, which we may or may not like, so I'm going to Control Z that a couple times to release all that. So in case you don't want something parented like that, you can just make a whole new set of joints. So I can go skeleton joint tool, which I already had the shortcut there. Click 1, 2, 3, oops, 4. So that's the 4 that I need. Enter to confirm that and move this in place. I could have drawn this right on top of his finger. That might have helped a little better to be more accurate. But I can rearrange this. Let's go to Insert and try and be as quick as possible, because I'm sure you don't want to sit here and watch all of this adjusting. Alright, so once that's good enough, you can go to here, Control D to duplicate it, move it over here, and then adjust it again. So go back to insert mode and kind of just move your joints around. Alright, and then one more. Control D to duplicate, put this over here. You can sort of scale your joints also if you wanted to, but it's probably better just to rearrange them. So I'll go to the move, the insert, put insert on here, move that there, this one here. As you can see here with the joint size, it gets a little bit, Had it been a larger joint size, it would be a little bit harder to work with. And then the very last one, Control D one more time, slide this up to here, and I have these. And if you do this as a top-down view, this is going to be a lot easier. Being an angle view like this, it's a lot harder to work with. So let's rotate that out to there. And then adjust some of these. So move that to there. Alright, okay, that should be good enough. It's probably not going to match in the side view. Nope. So I'll take all of these, let's say this one, this one, this one, and this one, and then move all of these into position. That one goes about there. These slide over here. They rotate up. And again, this will take a while to get them super accurate, but I'm not going to worry about making sure they're super accurate for this video. For when you do your own model at home, make sure you're a little more accurate. I'm going to try and get through this as quick as possible. Okay, so that should align all the knuckles. They're still not quite in line with the fingers. Slide that up there. And again, if you're doing the T-pose where it's straight out, this is a lot easier than trying to organize this in perspective mode. Let's rotate this a little bit. Okay. And the same for the thumb. Let's rotate that. Rearrange these knuckles. Alright, so that's good enough for there. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is make sure the rotations are correct on these. So if I go to rotate, let's press E in the keyboard, oops, get that insert. We want to make sure all the blues are kind of facing this direction. So if I rotate this direction, we want to make sure that they all bend in this direction. So all the blues are facing in a line coming straight down, so when his fingers curl in, they'll curl this direction. So we're going to use all the same Z-axis. You could pick a different one if you wanted to use Y, just make sure they're all uniform. But since coming down this direction, it's already bending at the angle kind of that we want, I'm going to leave it with using the blue. Alright, so this one is on the blue one, this one's on blue, and the end point doesn't matter. Since that one's not going to rotate and affect anything. So this one, kind of try and keep that in a straight line there. Or as well as possible. Rotate this one up so it's following the same blue. And again, the fingers aren't quite accurate. I'm not going to sit here for a whole lot of time doing that. So this one should be rotated up as well. That one's good, that one's fine. Alright, and make sure they're still intact here. Mostly intact. Alright, so finally that finishes up the fingers. So good enough there. The next thing we want to do is we want to put a joint in the hips to control or attach all these joints back together. So I'm going to go over to, let's say, the side view, and let's go with creating a new joint. Click the joint tool. I'm going to start up here where the top of his hips are going to be. I'm going to click and drag, or well, click it once, let go, and then click and drag, and put this one straight down. So this will be his end of his hip bone. I'll put it probably a little bit lower. So right about there, at the bottom level of his hips. Press enter to confirm that. And then let me rearrange this one, pull this a little bit lower. So it's more of his belt line, I guess, where his hips are going to be bending from. Alright, so let's pull this up in front view. So now I have a joint here. Let's go to perspective. I have a joint sitting here. This will be the main root control, or actually this one's going to be the root control. So we have all these different joints now. So now we need to start parenting our joints together. Also, we don't want any rotates on our joints before I start doing this. So let's, you see how there's a rotate on the joint? We want to get rid of all our rotates. The translates will stay because they need to know where they are in world space, but the rotates we don't need. So and there's no rotates here, and we did a lot of rotating down here for all these different joints to kind of get these in place. So we want to get rid of all these rotates. So I'm going to click the top joint and go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and if I press Apply, it erases out, or it zeroes out our rotates. So it clears that out, and it does it all the way down the chain. So everything that was selected on here got erased out as well. This one has rotates, so I'm going to apply that one. This one we want to clear out those rotates, so Freeze Transformations, apply that, and then apply it there, and apply it there. So that freezes out this, and we're not going to worry about the other side of him because we're going to mirror our joints when we're done. So that freezes out these. Because they got froze though, it could make it a little harder to try and organize these things. But as long as you're, actually it looks like it works out pretty well. It keeps the rotations pretty accurate. Let's move that one over here somewhere. Okay, and again we did more adjusting, so let's apply that to freeze those, to try and make those as accurate as possible. Alright, and I think we've already done that one, yep. So the next up we have this one which didn't rotate, this one we did, so let's apply that, and clears them out all the way down the chain, so we're good there. So the next up we want to go through is we want to start parenting some things together, so I'm going to close out that. So I'm going to take, let's say, when parenting, there's two ways of doing it, and it's very confusing of why Maya does this. There's child parent and parent child. The same effects, whereas the child can't move the parent, but the parent can move the child because I guess the parent's bigger. It can move the child. It's more important. The child can't move the parent. So when you select things, you've got to select them in a certain order. So if I want to parent things, let's say, if I click this one, this will be the child, and then hold shift and click the chest joint. This will be the parent. So the parent, when this one moves, will move the arms. So because child is selected and then parent afterwards holding shift, I can go to skeleton, not skeleton, I don't need any of that. Just press P on the keyboard and it'll parent it. So now when I click on the chest bone, you can see that it bends the arms forward, so the parent, which is the main backbone, will move the child. The difference is sometimes you have to click parent child instead of child parent. So whenever you're using the menu up here, any of these different constraints, you have to go parent child before clicking these. But when you're pressing P on the keyboard, you have to go child parent. It's really confusing, and it's annoying that they would change it like that, but it's just what they did. So just try and pay attention to what I'm saying with the P, which one comes first, parent-child or child-parent. Otherwise, you're going to get things backwards, and so the arm will move the backbone, but the backbone won't move the arm, which doesn't quite make sense. So the next thing we want to do is we want to parent these together. So we want to take these. So this was going to be the one in charge, so we need to click the child first, the child to the parent, so that actually no, this child goes to this one. So child to parent, so when this one moves, it'll move this one. So child for the leg, parent for the hip bone, press P to connect them. So now when I take this bone and I rotate it, it'll rotate the whole lower body. When I take this bone and rotate it, it'll rotate the whole upper body. Alright, and then the last thing we need to connect these two. So this one's going to parent, so I need to click the child first. So child, which is this big bone, shift, grab the parent, so child parent, press P on the keyboard, and it'll connect these. So now all of the bones are connected except for the hands, which I have to go back to and do that. So this will rotate. If I grab the root, it controls everything. Everything above the root is just the upper body. Everything below the root, which is this one, is just the lower body. So I've separated it out by using a couple different joints here. And we also need to parent these together. So the same thing, this one's going to be child, and hold shift, this one's going to be the parent. So this wrist will control this thumb, so P on the keyboard. And so now the wrist, wherever it moves, will move that one. Same thing here, child, I can probably do all of them, all three childs. The last thing I click is the wrist, P for parent, and it connects all of them. So this one will move the entire wrist. So the order you click these things in is very important. If you mess up, might be able to Control Z a few times to make sure you're back to where you started and try again. Unparenting, it can be a little tricky, but you can unparent things. Alright, so that looks good enough for the demo that we're working on. Alright, so that puts all the joints in place. The next thing we need to go through is renaming all these joints so we can have these a little more organized in the hypergraph and the outliner when we pull those up. If you ever need to go back and change some things. So what I'm going to do here is start naming everything. I'm going to pause the video to save some time. I'll just name them and then I'll click on them and just show you what they're named rather than me having to click, 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 type everything. So it'll save us a little bit of time. But the first one right here, I'll click the one that selects everything. This one right here, this one's going to be called a root. So I can go and call this root joint and press OK or enter. So that's the root joint. It's this main one right here. So I'm going to go through and pause all this now. Okay, so I've gone through and named everything. We last left off with this one being called the root joint. So I named this one the hip joint, and then the very bottom one is the hip end joint. This one is the left thigh joint. So you can either click the bone or the little ball at the top, so either the ball or the whole bone. This is the left knee joint. This is the left ankle joint, left ball joint, and left toe joint. And you want to use the word left if you spell it either uppercase or lowercase or however you spell it. Using the full word left rather than the letter L. We're going to universally change all of them when we do the right side, so we know left and right. So if you call it all the same time, every time spelled the same way, left underscore, we can universally make them all turn right when we press mirror. So just to keep into account, probably better to use the full word left. So now we're going to go over to here. We have the root already done. So this is the back joint, this is the chest joint, neck joint, head joint, and I didn't name that one. So head and joint. Alright. This one is the left arm joint, and you can't click this one. It's part of the chest joint because it's a parent joint, and the parent created that for us. So we don't need to worry about that one. So it's the left arm joint. This is the left elbow joint. This is where it gets a little more confusing. Left wrist joint. Then we have left thumb joint, A, B, C, D, and repeat. Left index finger joint, A, B, C, D. And then left middle finger joint, A, B, C, D, right, or left ring finger joint, A, B, C, D, and left pinky finger joint, A, B, C, D. So that names all of our joints, so we have them organized now. And you can see here the joints are fitting in nicely inside the character. So the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to move, have a control that'll move the, let's say, the whole wrist. So when I grab this, I can move, and it'll move from the shoulder instead of bending at the elbow every time. So to do that, we're going to do something called an IK constraint. So how the IK constraint is or works, you go over to constrain with nothing selected in the scene down here. We'll go to, actually no, skeleton, not constrain. Skeleton, we're going to do IK handle tool. I can click on the options here, and for what we're doing now, we want an RP solver or rotate plane solver. They have single chain solvers also, SC solver. We want to use RP rotate plane solver for this. So once you're in the tool, click the shoulder first, click it with once the left mouse button, find the wrist joint and click it once with the left mouse button, and it should automatically put this crosshair in here. So now if I move this crosshair, you can see that it moves the whole joint from the shoulder, and it creates a little extra line in here, so I click off it, you'll see a brown line and the whole joint chain turned brown. So I can click this and move this, and this will solve for us where the arm goes, which is pretty cool. So Control Z to put this exactly back in place. You don't want to move it in place, you want to Control Z it so it returns back to its initial position. Alright, so once we do that, we want to do one more for here. Let me rename this one first. So when you're on this little handle, this little crosshair thing, I'm going to call this, again, same spelling, left IK, left arm IK. Alright, and the left will get turned into right when we mirror it. So now let's do this again. Skeleton, IK handle tool, same thing with the rotate plane on there. Click the top of the thigh once and left click the ankle, and that puts the solver in there, so I can move this around and you can see the leg moves nicely. Let's rename this again. So left leg IK. Everything's nice and organized. Alright, so once we have that named both of these, we have both of our IKs set in place. You can see that they've turned brown. So the next up, we want to go through and create a reverse lock foot. At the moment, you can see that when you grab the IK, it more or less works. You can step forward and you can work and animate this way, but it gets a little tedious because as you're trying to, let's say, step on a flat step, your foot's really bent right here. And as soon as you touch the flat step, if you want to have the character land here, the whole heel is still bent and crooked. He doesn't land flat-footed. So we want to be able to control that he lands flat-footed. You can bend it in the air, but when he hits the ground, it's flat. Because if he steps forward, now he's curving too far this way. If the step's too far away, his step would have to be perfectly in the right place for it to land at the same space. So by creating a reverse lock foot, it'll make it a little bit easier for the animator. So to do this, it's a little tedious, but not quite as tedious as the hands. We're going to go and create a new joint system. So I'm going to click on the joint right here. I'm going to do this in the side view. So down to here, and I'm going to start on the bottom of the heel. So I'm going to click once and find the position I like, and then let go. Then don't click on the joint itself, click off of it and drag it down somewhere so they overlap right on top. And again, click off of it, drag it down so it matches over top the the heel of the ball. And again, one more time, click and drag over top so it matches close enough to the ankle. Press enter to confirm that, and we have a new joint system. I'm going to jump out, and you can see here that it's a whole new separate joint. It's not connected to here. It's reverse direction. We went forward with it. Now we're going backwards up the chain, so it's called RL, reverse lock. I'm going to rename these points now. So this one on the end is going to be called the heel joint. Actually, let me call this heel reverse lock joint, so I know which one's which, because we're going to have, let's click on this one, whereas we have, oops, I also need the word left. Left reverse lock toe joint. So let's put the word left in there. Left reverse lock heel joint. Alright, this one is going to be left reverse lock ball joint, and the very last one is the left reverse lock ankle joint. Alright, so once those are renamed, we can start popping these into position. Before we do that, I want to change the joint size. So if I click on the joint, you can see the radius is at 0.5 right now. I can select all of these. I probably won't do all of them at once though, but I can click on this and set it to, let's say, 1 for the radius. And it only does one at a time, so we'll have to manually do each. So click on the toe and set the radius to 1, press enter. And it makes the joint manually bigger than what the display is setting. It's kind of overriding it because we're going to overlap the joints, and we want to make sure that we can still be able to click on the two different ones because we're going to need to do that. So it's a larger one now. So now we can start popping the joints in place. So I'm going to go to, I guess, insert mode, and then hold the V key. Actually, take the mesh and template it. If it's not in template mode, it's in reference mode, and you try and hold the V key, it'll snap to all the different vertices on your character. And you can see it's popping in place. If I template the mesh, or just turn it all off to begin with, when I hold the V key on the keyboard and use the middle mouse scroll wheel and push and hold both down, so the V and the middle mouse, I can click it right into place, and you can see it locks perfectly in there. It'll pop to whatever vertice, or in this case joint, is in place. So now I can let go of the V key and the middle mouse button, and it's locked in place. Let's go grab the next one, which is the ball joint. Hold the V key, middle mouse, drag it and pop it right into place. Same thing here, hold V, middle mouse to the toe. And then the last one, there's nothing to snap to, so I'm just going to snap it to the toe and then take the blue line and pull it straight back out. And this way I know that it's in a straight line orientation. Or you can just kind of manually move it there, I guess. So pop back out of insert mode so we can move things again. And you can see now that I have two different joints. One is smaller on the inside and one is larger. So the reverse lock is easier to grab now because it's a larger size joint. And so now we have all that set up. So the next thing we want to do is, I guess we can start mirroring our joints, and then we're going to start creating the foot constraints to control all of the reverse lock. So in order to do this, I'm going to select all the major parts. So in this case, the bottom right here, which selects all of the joint, and I can go over to skeleton, mirror joint. I'll pop out the options just to make sure we're accurate. Depending on the direction you modeled your character, I'm using let's say if I'm going to mirror from this side to this side, the middle line down here is for me going to be the z-axis. You can see it's blue right here, so z, and we're going to go across the direction up here, which is the y, so I need the yz. But if you modeled them from this direction, you might need a different one. So the plane that separates him, if you can imagine a piece of paper going between his legs, one side to the other side, that plane in the middle is what we're looking for. And that's set up by using, you can see here, the YZ. If you look at it straight on, the piece of paper that would divide him in half is YZ. Looking at it from this direction, you would see it's a YX direction. And we don't want to mirror in this direction. We want to mirror him across the match on both sides. So I'm using the YZ, but you might need a different orientation depending. Behavior is fine. And search for, and here's the interesting part, or the cool part, if I type in left underscore, the same way I spelled all of these over here, with the same lowercase and everything, and I can replace it with right underscore. So every time it sees the word left, it'll replace it with right. So I press apply, and it pops over here. So now I have the word right, reverse lock heel joint, right, reverse lock toe joint, ball joint, and ankle joint. So it saves me a lot of time of having to rename things. And let's repeat that. So I'm going to click the top one, where I put the IK attached to, and repeat the same process. So the same mirror orientation, apply that, and it should have renamed everything for us. So it'll mirror the IK, it'll mirror everything across, and it'll rename it the way we want to see it. And the very last one, I'll grab the arm and apply that, and it even copies the parent across. So now I can grab the IK, and you can see it still moves everything the way we want it to. And we're pretty much done drawing joints for the time being. So the next step, we want to go through and start putting down the constraints for the feet.